Patrick Daugherty, put out one of his pillar pieces of the entire offseason. One of the pillar pieces of Rotoworld every single year. His head coach rankings. And now is the time for Pat to sit in a chair in a dark room with that glass that can only be seen through one side with a mirror on the other side. What is that called? And to now have this spotlight shone on him for us to interrogate Patrick Daugherty on his head coach rankings. Pat, before we dive into 1 through 32, let's first get a sense of what these rankings are. It's not just the 2019 season, correct? It's kind of the entire tenure of these head coaches as players and pieces of an NFL franchise.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I take the rankings aspect seriously. I don't want to just throw out a completely random ordering of the coaches, but that really is secondary. It's supposed to be more of just a snapshot of like where each coach and kind of by extension their team is at right now, like where they find themselves right now. And so like, and some of it too, like, you know, these rankings, I don't know if I could say for sure if like this is the exact order of like, if I was picking a coach, you know, to start my franchise with right now, you know, would I really start? I don't know if I would start my franchise with John Harbaugh over Sean McVay, but I try to make it very holistic about past accomplishments, current situation, current work, like kind of future projection. It's just supposed to be a snapshot of where these guys are in their career and where their teams are in the league right now.
Which ranking did you receive the biggest brushback for?
It's always some really random. I had a lot. It's Mike Tomlin every year. It's some years you have him way too high. Some years you have him way too low. This year I got a lot of Tomlin too low. Actually, I have him at 6. Had a surprising amount of Pete Carroll too low. And see, that's another one. I have Pete Carroll ranked 9th. And to me, I say in the write-up, Pete Carroll is one of the greatest coaches in football history. Like not just NFL history, but like all of football history between what he's done at USC and Seattle. But that's kind of like where the right now comes in, where even though he's still winning, you know how frustrating Pete Carroll is. So I'd say Tomlin and Carroll. I had a shocking amount of attaboys on where I had Sean McDermott, like Bills fans just chiming in, like, yeah, I have him 11. Well, like, yeah, that's great. You know, they're excited about Sean McDermott. Like, this feels right. I had like the most concurrence on Sean McDermott.
Well, let's go back on script here. So let's go through these rankings in chunks of 5. Pat, we should probably start by saying you're only ranking coaches that have been on their job for at least one season. So all the new hires, even if they're like Ron Rivera, who's just going from one team to another, he is not included. So in the end, you have 27 coaches ranked.
I had a surprising amount of blowback about that for sure. I do that every year, and like people were like, "Why can't you rank Ron Rivera? He coached last year." And it's just like if a coach is in like a total reset situation, I just kind of want to rank them based on that. I don't want to rank them.
And we've seen even when coaches switch teams, how they have to take a year or two to get what they want to fit their style. And I think Ron Rivera is definitely a case up there, and they might not get that immediately. So you might not have a great sense of who they are, you know, in their new home. All right. So again, we're going to do chunks of 5. Then Daigle and I are going to pick out a coach or two in that 5 and ask Pat about them. Number 1, Bill Belichick, New England Patriots. 2, Andy Reid. 3, Sean Payton. 4, John Harbaugh. And 5, Doug Peterson. Pat, that 5 is fascinating to me, more so because of John Harbaugh, obviously of the Ravens, at number 4. And that's because, you know, that top 3 are coaches who are strongly affiliated to one side of the football. I mean, Bill Belichick is, you know, the foundation of the Patriots defense. Obviously, Andy Reid and Sean Payton for their offenses. Doug Peterson at 5 and the Eagles offense. Yet John Harbaugh is this former special teams coordinator, and we don't see him and maybe his fingerprint necessarily on one side of the ball or the other. How was that dynamic when ranking him among all his other peers?
Yeah, there aren't many CEO-style coaches in the NFL, and definitely are not many in the top 10. And John Harbaugh is someone where to like really get a sense of what Harbaugh does, you kind of need. There's been a great athletic deep dive on him over the years, a great ESPN deep dive a year or two ago, and he's someone who he speaks to like. I mean, to me, the base qualification for any NFL head coach needs to be they need to really handle their side of the ball. So yeah, when it comes to Harbaugh, how do you evaluate someone like Harbaugh? Harbaugh has always been so good at picking the right lieutenants. I mean, how many different Ravens assistants since 2008 have gotten head coaching jobs or become coordinators from position coaches? And so he's amazing at that. He's amazing at setting the overall tone. Like, you should read about the stuff he does with analytics, the stuff he does with scheduling, like their week. He schedules things like down to the minute. And he just knows. So like, kind of like the central piece of my Harbaugh write-up here is, very few coaches, most NFL coaches are against change. And John Harbaugh, once or twice over the years, has had a hot seat, despite being one of the best coaches in the NFL, and most recently in 2018. And to like get his seat unhot, they just switched to Lamar Jackson, which necessitated changing like the entire substance and style of their offense. And that is the kind of change most coaches will never make in a career. And not only did John Harbaugh make it, he did it in the middle of the season, and switched kind of coordinators even in the middle of the season. There wasn't a technical firing there, but they basically made Greg Roman the coordinator in the middle of the season. And most coaches are not willing to do that kind of drastic change in a career. And the fact that he did it on the fly in the middle of the season kind of just speaks to John Harbaugh's he's just willing to do, like Bill Belichick, he is willing to do whatever it takes to win. And the proof has quite obviously been in the pudding there with him.
Dago, anything from you?
Nope. That's the one person wanted to talk about, unless we need to talk about how far Belichick falls down when the Patriots go 13.
Yeah, Pat, I think that's a fair question. I think that's a fair question to ask. Like, what if Bill goes 7-9 next season? 6-10 next season. Is there any way he falls out of that number one spot? If Andy Reid, who has a fantastic roster right now, we know Sean Payton is all in on 2020 as well. Is there any chance that Bill moves off that number one spot?
I mean, Bill Belichick could go like 0-16, like 3 or 4 seasons in a row, and I don't think I'd probably remove him from the top spot. And I do think the my Belichick write-up, I talk about, so like the inclination for the Patriots is going to be make 2020 a referendum on Belichick versus Brady. And I think it's silly. We have no way of knowing we'll have no way of ever knowing who truly deserved the most credit for this 2-decade dynasty. But I kind of talk like, we kind of already saw what a post-Tom Brady, Bill Belichick will be like, because last year, Brady appeared limited with the horrible supporting cast. And so what did Belichick do? He just coached the best defense of his entire career. They allowed a league-low 225 points. We already kind of have like a window into post-Brady Belichick. And I don't think – I mean, if you think Bill Belichick's going to stop winning now that Tom Brady's gone – so you probably haven't really been paying close attention. And I think that – and I don't think that's a referendum on Tom Brady either.
No.
Like I said, it's just like two geniuses found each other, and Bill's just going to get to keep doing it longer than Tom because of the nature of his position. Tom's reliant on his body. Bill is reliant on his mind, and he's going to get to keep winning.
Or if you think Bill's going to choose to lose, I think that's also incorrect, especially with the defense he has constructed. Like, the NFL's Defensive Player of the Year is still in his roster. Like, you cannot go down to 2 or 3 wins with the defense and the secondary that he has built on that side of the ball. So
no,
I think that conclusion that some people are making is just wild to me.
I blocked someone on Twitter this week who said that to me, not solely for that. But like the idea that the Patriots would tank is maybe the most laughable thing I've ever heard.
It's very Jordan-esque. Kelly's not addicted to gambling; he's addicted to competition. Like
I almost tweeted that this week. Like I can't remember what I wanted it to be, but like basically like most vicious competitor, I was going to tweet a poll: Bill Belichick or Michael Jordan. They really are.
We've moved on from Pat reiterating the tweets he's already made to ones he almost made. So yes. I think that we've entered a new realm of this podcast. All right, the next chunk of names, 6 through 10. 6, Mike Tomlin of the Pittsburgh Steelers. 7, Sean McVay of the Los Angeles Rams. 8, Kyle Shanahan, San Francisco 49ers. 9, Pete Carroll, Seahawks. And 10, Mike Zimmer of the Minnesota Vikings. Daigle, which one of those stood out to you?
Sean McVay at number 7 would suggest he didn't lose an iota of respect despite last year's somewhat disaster for that Rams team.
Yeah, I mean, but when you think about it, so another thing I got a lot of pushback on was having Sean McVay ahead of Kyle Shanahan. Because
I would push back on that. These
rankings are like year sensitive to a degree, but obviously I can't just be moving people like completely crazy. The Sean McVay body of work is still – I mean, he's had 3 coaching – he's been a coach 3 years. He's never had a winning percentage below 625. That's your winning percentage when you go 9-7. And he to me, it was almost a victory that they went 9-7 last year, considering the key to his success as a play caller has been manipulating Jared Goff. And they couldn't do that behind the offensive line last year. They didn't have an effective safety valve in Todd Gurley, and he still went 9-7. Sean McVay's, overall body of work, I had to wait that. I have Kyle Shanahan one spot behind him. To me, if you're looking for a tiebreaker, there are two young offensive auteurs who have both made a Super Bowl already. It is basically a toss-up, but I did have to wait Sean McVay. Because it's not like Sean McVay inherited some really good building blocks, but when Sean McVay inherited this Rams roster, it's not like it was viewed as like a plug-and-play roster, and they immediately won 11 games. So it's not like – so Kyle Shanahan, came into like a rebuilding team. So some people might say, well, of course you can't hold those first few years against Shanahan. It's not really like I do. But it's not like McVay had like the world's greatest roster and just like pressed play and started winning games. He came into a very uncertain situation too and just started winning right off the bat.
It's a big year for Sean McVay. We've talked about it before, firing the likes of Wade Phillips and, switching up his offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, and trying to self-scout every single week. There was a period of time, Pat, in that 2018 season. I know they went to the Super Bowl, but that Lions team, that defense, and the Patriots, again, were running like this 6-1 front, basically, and gave them tons of headaches. And then, those headaches just didn't go away last year. And so while they're probably moving away, and they did somewhat last year of running 11 personnel 90+% of the time, it's a big offseason for McVay to reinvent himself. And I know he dropped from 3-7 on your list this year, and Kyle Shanahan moved up from 15-8 this year. But I think the momentum is probably working in the opposite directions with both right now. Do you think, Pat, that we're all just like a little too giddy about Kyle Shanahan? Like this dynamic of him and John Lynch that for years built, losing teams. And a lot of that was because the quarterback was injured. But now I, myself included, am just all in on Kyle Shanahan, and probably those outcomes in the past weren't indicative of how good he was as a coach.
No, I don't think anyone's – we can almost be under giddy on Kyle Shanahan because so first off, he's proven it both as a coordinator and as a head coach. I think we all agree the vast majority of the credit for that Falcons Super Bowl appearance, probably if you're going to sign it to a coach, goes to Kyle Shanahan, not to Dan Quinn. That's become even more obvious in the years that have passed. But Kyle Shanahan, what he did last year, so the 49ers – so part of what I said, why it finally all came together for Kyle Shanahan last year was trust in his key lieutenants kind of coming to fruition, letting John Lynch assemble the roster, letting Robert Saleh run the defense. But if I'm looking for real reasons for optimism, they did this on offense when they didn't have a clear lead back. They had a true running back by committee where they had a very uneven passing attack where they got to the Super Bowl really kind of without a bunch of excellent individual performances on offenses. And he very much made the whole greater than the sum of its parts. And he kind of got there more on scheme than offensive talent. Not that they had no offensive talent. Obviously, they had a lot of offensive talent. But that's why this Kyle Shanahan season was so impressive to me, because he really displayed his full Shanahan-ness. Where this was more about scheme than personnel, in my opinion. And the personnel is nowhere to go but up. And just if you're talking scheme, maybe offensive scheme, maybe Andy Reid is better than Kyle Shanahan, but that's about it.
Low-key really like putting the likes of Pete Carroll and Mike Zimmer after the McVays and the Shanahans and even the people we talked about earlier on this list, because that kind of shows you embracing offensive nightmares and those names we just mentioned versus, ball control and tempo and defense of Pete Carroll and Mike Zimmer. All right.
So one more quick. You still can't completely discount them.
It wins.
Because Pete Carroll, since they've lost the Super Bowl in the 6 seasons in, they've still averaged 10 victories. Just now as I write every year about Pete Carroll, it's like he's still great. Why does he make it this hard on himself? And
all right. Next chunk of 5, 11 through 15. Sean McDermott of the Buffalo Bills checks in at 11. 12, Mike Vrabel, Tennessee Titans. 13, Frank Reich with the Colts. 14, Bruce Arians of the Bucks, and 15, Matt LaFleur of the Packers. Daigle, when you were going through RotoPat's piece, did any of these catch your eye?
This just seems like the middling tier where we kind of shove everyone and then you just subjectively rank them, right? Because all these guys, when you go one lower, we'll get to that in a second, but we're getting closer to the cutoff where Pat thinks coaches are average and below average. So these guys are technically above average in these rankings. But then again, you just look at the names and, I have respect for Frank Reich and Bruce Arians, Mike Vrabel, but it doesn't seem like they've done much over a long period of time at their position.
Yeah, this is kind of like the transition zone of the list. There's some people who are like a flash, seem ready to make a move, like Sean McDermott or Mike Vrabel and Frank Reich, who talked about giving Sean McVay credit for a season that went awry. The fact that Frank Reich went 7-9 after his quarterback retired in August, like a biblical wave of injuries on both sides of the ball, was probably still a good sign for him. I mean, Bruce Arians, is there really 13 NFL head coaches better than Bruce Arians? I'm not sure, but Bruce Arians just kind of seemed out of gas to me. He seemed out of gas to me at the end in Arizona. It seemed like he was going through the motions last year in Tampa Bay. Like someone who used to be like a micromanager, just didn't seem to have that fire. But I think maybe Bruce Arians is now kind of graduating into a CEO role. And you don't sign Tom Brady if you're lacking for ambition. So I think maybe Bruce Arians is kind of getting that fire back. Then Matt LaFleur at 15. It's kind of like, that's when I don't really have any idea what to do with. Usually a rookie head coach, if they go 13-3, I'll probably get them into the top 10. But the Packers, can any of us figure out how the Packers did this last year? They didn't score any more points than 2018. The defense was a lot better, but the advanced statistics basically said this was a 10-6 roster, not a 13-3 roster. They went 8-1 in one-score games, a really fickle statistic, as we know. And LaFleur at 15 is kind of like, I don't know where to put this guy.
Well, and I'm sure you're not looking ahead because that's impossible to predict what they're doing. So I'm sure you didn't count, the Jordan Love acquisition,
no.
the running back acquisition in the second round, who's, trying to recreate his Derrick Henry. So I think that obviously only gives you more pause. There's a lot to hit on what you said, Pat. Bruce Arians is fascinating because it was a case last year, and he said it publicly, that if I couldn't get these coordinators and Byron Leftwich and Todd Bowles, I wouldn't be doing this job. And It kind of seems like this Tom Brady energy with Rob Gronkowski has kind of been like an injection of excitement into him a little bit.
Exactly.
Go ahead.
It almost felt like a science project. This is what I write in the red. It almost felt like a science project last year to see if he could get Byron Leftwich or Todd Bowles a head coaching job. It seemed like he cared more about that than the season. It was just a bizarre vibe from Bruce Arians for me. But as we both seem to believe, maybe he's kind of getting his mojo back. And because you don't go get Tom Brady if you don't have big aspirations for the upcoming season.
And Frank Reich, as you mentioned, a year ago, he thought Andrew Luck was his quarterback at this time of year. And just in that position, there are only 32 of those jobs, being able to at least get 7-9 out of them last year. I mean, I think that's a positive in his hat when the roster, I don't think was, they have obviously great pieces in certain areas, but as a whole is not complete. The two I want to hit on quickly, Pat, Mike Vrabel. The biggest question to me is that the style that is sticky? Is that the style that is going to sustain success because they brought the band back together basically in every facet. And so in the 12 or 14 game stretch, whatever it was, and I know they got deep into the playoffs, and, I was all in on that team because they were fun, but I don't know. It's not something like a Sean Payton offense. It's not something like a Andy Reid offense that we can be like, yeah, definitely. I can see that going another year. And then I love that Sean McDermott's at number 11 because he, I think you can separate someone who's been in his position for 2 or 3 years if you can easily see the mind games that are working and kind of his plan and if it's being enacted. And with Sean McDermott, you absolutely can because he basically tried to recreate the Super Bowl contending defense that he had in Carolina. He has done that. And then he's gotten this, high variance playmaker at quarterback, but he's like, hey, Brian Daboll, reel him in a little bit and play to his strengths. And that certainly happened as well.
Yes, a few quick thoughts on Vrabel. I mentioned, rushing volume and passing opportunism can work on offense. But as you said, that's you have a low margin for error with that style of offense. So that is a big concern with Mike Vrabel. That's like a high wire that's a high wire act on offense because if you fall behind in a game, that doesn't work. But Mike Vrabel said the single most important thing for any head coach to do, in my opinion, is you've got to take care of your side of the ball. You've got to be the tone setter on your side of the ball. And I'd say Mike Vrabel has made the Titans probably a top 10 defense over the past year. Without they have a talent, but not like when you think of like the most talented defenses, you're probably not going to think of the Tennessee Titans. But
not at all.
They've been a top 10 defense under Mike Vrabel. So he's taking care of his side of the ball. He's not afraid to make big decisions. This finish last year was sparked by him benching, someone who should have been their franchise player. And he just seems like someone kind of getting the broad strokes to me, right? And Sean McDermott, you talk about taking care of your own side of the ball. I mean, Sean McDermott has already proven to be one of the probably 3 or 4 best defensive game planners on the entire NFL. I mean, I think they've been a top 2 defense by most of the broad metrics the past year in terms of like yards or points. And Sean McDermott just knows defense, period. The Bills have made 2 playoff appearances this century. Both have been under Sean McDermott the past 3 years. So clearly he's doing something right. But he's another guy who has so much front office power. I think it's going to take a little longer for McDermott to kind of complete his project because him and Brandon Beane, they made a very risky decision at quarterback. And it looks like Josh Allen has too many fatal flaws. And I think Sean McDermott's probably a quarterback away from being able to complete his project. But he's one of the best defensive minds already in the NFL.
16 through 20. Dig, I'll let you take this one after I go through the list. Matt Nagy of the Bears sits at 16. 17, Bill O'Brien, Houston Texans. 18, Anthony Lynn, Los Angeles Chargers. 19, Jon Gruden and the Las Vegas Raiders. And 20, Brian Flores of the Miami Dolphins.
It's an interesting one because I think Brian Flores should be higher. Like, we saw him have that Belichick competitiveness, and he couldn't even accept tanking for a better quarterback and still lucked into Tua at number 5 overall. But this is the cutoff. This is where, Pat, you were saying Matt Nagy, who I genuinely don't know anything about as a head coach. We've seen one good year and one terrible year. You're saying he is the bar for average, 16 overall. And then you're saying beyond him, Bill O'Brien sets the bar for being below average at number 17.
Bill O'Brien, man, like, where would you guys rank Bill O'Brien? This is the kind of thing I feel like you'd get 10 different answers on where to rank Bill O'Brien.
He probably led the entire league in Control F whenever readers jumped in this, right? Like, just trying to figure out.
He's becoming the new Fisher for sure. He's just, again, this is what I say on the right. He's just a figure of like utter bafflement. Like, what do you do with Bill O'Brien? Because, we know all about Bill O'Brien's foibles and the things that are wrong with him. But you can't write him complete. He's a man who's won divisions with Brock Osweiler and Brian Hoyer. So it's like you can't completely write Bill O'Brien off. It's just one of those things I still don't know what I'm looking at with Bill O'Brien. Nothing about him makes sense. I don't expect anything about him to make sense going forward. He has been trending down. I think I had him like 9th or 10th. I had him in the top 10 a few years ago when he was seeming – the first
when he was
years,
new to the scene, when you didn't know as much about him, when he didn't have as much power, so on and so forth.
He was still considered a QB guru.
Yeah.
Yes, when the car hood had not been popped on him.
Right.
He has been falling. It's bizarre because he's 11-5 and just made the divisional round. Bill O'Brien, was there anything more Bill O'Brien? He has one of the most stirring comebacks in recent playoff history in the wild card round. And then in the divisional round, he blows a 24-0 lead and loses by 20 points. I mean, that is maybe the most Bill O'Brien thing of all time.
He's 52 and 44 in his career. Pat, you're going to be surprised on this list who I think is ranked too low. That's Jon Gruden. I think Jon Gruden is ranked too low. And I understand like their point differential last year was abysmal. But besides that fact that I just spit out, watching that team, I actually thought Jon Gruden did a pretty good job offensively. The offensive line was a lot better than expected heading in. Josh Jacobs, a top 5 running back in the league at times last season, the piece, and we talked about in last episode, the piece that I think is holding them back, one, is not having enough playmakers offensively. And we saw Darren Waller go off because he was actually a legitimate playmaker. Well, that has possibly been changed this offseason with Henry Ruggs and a whole bunch of other names brought in. But the question is, like, what is the ceiling with Derek Carr in charge? But, the biggest question with Jon Gruden is how much time he spent away from it, if he could catch up to the current NFL, right? Could he catch up to the McVays, the Shanahans, the so on and so forth? And I can't give you, like, I'm no expert or guru or coach or whatever, but from just an entertainment perspective, there is a chance to me where it might not reach the Broncos or obviously the Chiefs and the AFC West, but that the Las Vegas Raiders put out a top half offense next season for sure.
It's Jon Gruden's another guy. It's not quite to the Bill O'Brien level, but it's kind of like hard to know what to make of this. And I say it'd be uncharitable to call him a bad coach. Jon Gruden is not a bad coach. But when you're making $10 million a year, you're paid to be making more than incremental progress. You're being paid to be a difference maker. And Jon Gruden can still scheme a highly efficient offense. He's gotten Derek Carr each of the past 2 years, like new levels of efficiency, but hasn't gotten those big plays that, like you said, he's so desperate for. And then Gruden's another guy like Bill O'Brien, where it's hard to separate Gruden the coach from Gruden the GM. And him and Mike Mayock, they go out and get Marcus Mariota. That's not going to solve their Derek Carr problem. And Gruden, I think he has shown enough as a coach where, given the right roster, Gruden can certainly be a playoff coach again. But I think he and Mayock kind of like a tendency to like overcorrect. And they got too desperate in this hunt for big play threats last year. The horrible move with Martavis Bryant, very risky move with Antonio Brown that did not pay off. And then again this year, they focused like their whole draft around playmakers. But what good are playmakers with Derek Carr and Marcus Mariota, two quarterbacks that have like kind of, I'd say, very much definitively proven they can't take advantage of those kind of players. And Gruden still is a good offensive mind. He can clearly scheme offense, but he's not meeting the baseline of a $10 million per year coach. And I just think ultimately his work in the front office alongside Mike Mayock is probably going to undermine him too much and kind of keep him stuck in like the 7-9, 9-7 zone.
All right, we move on with the next chunk. That is 21. Why don't we just go 21 to 27 since that rounds out this list. Cliff Kingsbury at 21 with the Arizona Cardinals. 22, Vic Fangio. 23, Dan Quinn. 24, Zach Taylor. 25, Adam Gase. There are people behind Adam Gase in this list. 26, Matt Patricia of the Lions. And 27 closes the bottom of this list, Pat, with Doug Marrone and the Jacksonville Jaguars. I know that, we're kind of filtering through the worst coaches, your list, not mine, your words, not mine, of the NFL right now. But there's some positivity and optimism in some of these names. I would point to there's a drastic difference between Cliff Kingsbury at 21 versus Doug Marrone at 27.
Yeah, I would actually too say this is the worst of the list has ever been. Like, there have been far worst coaches than Doug Marrone. By the way, a common complaint I got on Twitter was, why was Adam Gase not last? That was a common complaint from Jets.
Adam Gase wasn't even considered to be fired, whereas Doug Marrone, we thought he was gone, and he begged for his job in a meeting room and got it back. So
yeah, it's weird to call Doug Marrone the worst coach in the NFL because he's not really that offensive of a figure. But, I mean, he's literally and figuratively not that offensive of a figure. He's supposed to be an offensive mind, but he's not setting the tone on offense. He's cycling through offensive coordinators. Something a good coach has to do. You got to put up with roster problems. The Jags have had a lot of roster problems. You can't overcome bad rosters. That Jags defense regressed. Everyone expected the historically good Jags defense to regress, but it was much faster and harder than I think anyone could have seen coming. He had no answer for that. And it's just kind of like, what does Doug Marrone do? I can't put my finger on what any true positives Doug Marrone brings. I mean, he's not a player's coach. He's letting the team president last year fine players for standing on the sideline wrong. I did have Matt Patricia last for a long time, but I decided even Matt Patricia, I can find a few positives where he throws out some creative defensive game plans. Josh mentioned earlier in the podcast, the Patriots used the Lions' Super Bowl game plan against the Rams. Matt Patricia did have as much as we made fun of Matt Patricia in 2018, his offense, his run-heavy offense, he course-corrected last year and came back with a much better modern aerial scheme. He can't help this quarterback got hurt, but still, there's more bad than good with Matt Patricia. But
I will say, Pat,
so
for SEO and hot take purposes, going from Bill Belichick to Doug Marrone doesn't move the needle. If you ever think about that going in the future of what could bring more attention, I don't know. Bill Belichick to his protege overall. And Matt Patricia might be a little bit better. I'm just saying. But Pat, of this 21 to 27, there are some head coaches that are in no way losing their jobs. Cliff Kingsbury is one. Vic Fangio is one. Other than that, like Dan Quinn, obviously on the outs possibly, Adam Gase, Matt Patricia, Doug Marrone might be replaced halfway through the season by Jay Gruden. Who knows? So, yeah, I mean, Fangio and Kingsbury I could see as massive movers in this list next year.
So Fangio and Kingsbury, this is in no way trying to suggest they're bad coaches, but this is kind of where you see how difficult of an exercise this can be, because these are two guys we probably both have positive feelings. We have positive feelings about going before, but they have 1 year of head coaching experience. Both were under 500, and you basically got to start them somewhere. And I think Cliff Kingsbury will be better than Bill O'Brien and probably Jon Gruden and probably a lot of these guys in front of him. But there's been a lot of times we've thought that about head coaches. I thought that about Chip Kelly, and then it doesn't happen. So that's why the write-up is more important than the ranking, because based on, like the cold, hard facts of the 2019 season, I can't rank Cliff Kingsbury any higher. But in the write-up, we get into why he's still a promising head coach. We do the same thing with Vic Fangio. Got off to a horrible start last year, used a completely retrograde offense, got boat raced by bad teams. But did his thing as the year went on, imposed his will on defense, signaled the changes that were going to be coming on offense, and him and John Elway seem to understand the stakes. They can't run this ridiculous Stone Age run offense anymore. So, those are two guys we feel good about, but there's only so high you can put them after 1 year in a losing record.
The primary trait that Kingsbury holds over the rest of this list is the fact that when everything didn't seem to work, he would just change the approach, whereas everyone else just sticks with the same approach they know and they've known all along. So that is the one thing that I absolutely loved about Kingsbury last year.
And I'm so glad you said that, because that's what I put in the write-up too. So what tripped up Chip Kelly? He couldn't adapt. He had no answer for when the league, whereas Kingsbury last year, his problem was almost he had too many ideas. Couldn't decide. 1 week they're run heavy, 1 week they're pass heavy, 1 week they're super vertical on passing offense, 1 week they're really horizontal to passing offense. And he basically seemed like he was spending the year experimenting, figuring out who he wanted to be as an NFL head coach. Kingsbury is going to have answers for what is thrown at him. So I'm really glad you said that, because that's the main reason I see for optimism with Cliff Kingsbury.
And maybe they could have changed up. I don't know. But either way, I really think when we look back at Matt Patricia's tenure, because it's not going to end well. I would love for it to. It's not going to end well, though. I really think it's going to be blemished hard, because you could argue during his every single year with the Lions, he's had top-heavy talent to compete in the NFC North every single year, and just his style of play just can't get it done.
No, and he's a defensive head coach who's alienating his best defensive players. Chases off Quandre Diggs and chases off Darius Slay. That's something bad head coaches do. Good head coaches figure out how to keep their important players happy. It's not an easy job. It's a thankless task a lot of times, but that's what you have to do. And Matt Patricia is not a good enough coach to be chasing off super talented defensive players, and that's what he's done. He's done so many things that bad head coaches do.
I don't know. I put Bill O'Brien at number 17 on this list, so if he keeps doing it, maybe it winds up higher up. Okay, let's hit on some of the new hires. We have Joe Judge, obviously with the Giants, Mike McCarthy, the Dallas Cowboys, Matt Rule, Carolina Panthers, Ron Rivera, Washington Redskins, and the Kevin Stefanski-led Cleveland Browns. Pat, which of those are you most optimistic might wind up in the top 15 of this list next year?
Next year?
Yeah, give me one name. The one name that you are most comfortable saying, yes, he has a strong chance of being in the top 15.
It's probably going to be it's the worst possible answer. I mean, it's probably going to be Mike McCarthy because of his track record and the talent he's going to have this year. And he was another guy every year, like, where the heck do I put Mike McCarthy? The Cowboys, they wanted a culture change after a decade of clapping through Jason Garrett's underachievement. And they certainly got it in Mike McCarthy, one of the more grim people you will ever encounter. In a league full of grim people, McCarthy is one of the most grim. But he's the guy, he swears he's different. He had an awakening in his year away from the league. He says he's not going to be so much of a micromanager. I mean, I put it in his favor in the right. I was stunned when Mike McCarthy retained Kellen Moore as offensive coordinator. That's like Mike McCarthy's baby is like micromanaging the offense, like a literally every play basis. So that maybe led me to believe maybe Mike McCarthy has changed. Maybe he will be the right guy for this. Next year, the highest of these guys is probably going to be Mike McCarthy, which is not a fun answer, but probably just an acknowledgement of reality.
Daigle, we've gone through coaches 1 through 27/32 on this list. I'm going to pose this question to you. Who do you think is going to be the biggest mover in this group, either positively or negatively, next year?
I will say Zach Taylor, because I still don't know who he is. I have no idea. I couldn't pick him out of a one-man lineup. Like, I don't know what his personality is. I don't know what he does for that organization, but he's doing something.
I also noticed, Pat, that his write-up is the shortest of everyone, so I don't think you know who he is either. I'm right there with you. I think Vic Fangio moving up from 22 into the teens, easily the teens, is definitely possible, because we already saw his defensive makeup last year and how much they've invested in offense. I think that team, the Broncos, might be not lucking into a window to win, but heading in that direction, maybe not by their own doing. And Matt Nagy at 16, I could see him in the 20s or off this list completely next year. I don't think that Bears team is set up for success at all. An improvement from Mitch Trubisky, hoping that Nick Foles is going to be the answer to the offense, to the team in general. With that defense, we know how sticky that is year to year and how sticky it was from 2018 to 2019. I can see the Bills in a world of hurt next year.
Yeah, so you caught the spirit of the Nagy write-up because it was a miracle they were even 8-8 last year. And he just has too many subpar athletes, too many important spots on off. Matt Nagy was very creative as a rookie head coach, but he doesn't have the right talent to do that with. And he's a guy who, kind of through no fault of his own, who could be plunging and could be headed back to coordinator land very soon.
And the Texans do have an opening for a hygiene coordinator. So when Bill O'Brien takes that on, what does that do for his coaching skills?
All right. We've gone through the list. Any closing thoughts, Pat, before we close this chapter? Again, one of the pillar pieces of Rotoworld's offseason, which you can go check out right now on rotoworld.com. Pat, the floor is yours.
I just hope people read it. Again, I work hard on the actual ranks, the number, but it's more about the write-up. It's more just about the assessment of where these coaches and their teams are. And I would just encourage the readers to focus on that. Again, I'm not just mailing in the rankings. I understand you got to have people want them ranked. You have to have them ranked. But to focus on the substance of the write-up and not necessarily just the number. I have so much fun doing this. It's definitely the most fun I have writing an article all year. And it's a fascinating topic. It's a topic you can have an entire podcast on, as we just did. It's a very, very fascinating topic.
And they can send all complaints, every single one you're open to @RotoPat on Twitter, correct?
And they do. So,
all right. That's going to do it for us. Again, thank you, Pat, for joining us. Thank you, John Daigle, for being here as well. We'll be back next Tuesday with the first week of the NFL season spoiled for all of you. We'll go through every single game, pick the winners and the losers. Should be
but before then,
an exercise. What's before then, Daigle?
To like and subscribe, because last I checked, Josh, we are officially on the 5th row from the top under the football category. Hit the cheers applause. Ain't no stopping us now.
What does that mean, 5th row from the top? I don't even know what that means.
I mean, to be fair, there are only 2. When you go to iTunes, there are only 2 podcasts in each row. So we're next to Adam Schefter, last I looked, under football, which is good. That means we're up there. But we can be higher.
We're coming for you. We're coming for your Shefty.
The goal, we just want to be everyone's third favorite podcast. If we are everyone's third favorite podcast, we are doing our jobs.
Trust me, we will lean into July and August when people are trying to create and draft their best fantasy football team possible. But now is the time to get in. Get in before all that. That's going to be like our second and third album, which everyone loves. But this is the real stuff now.
Don't be a sheep.
The early stuff that people really like, and you can refer back to it whenever you want to. All right. Let's go home. Let's have a weekend. For John Daigle, for Patrick Doherty, I'm Josh Norris, up the Villa. Talk to you soon. See you.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.